So I'm Ian Thomas, I'm a software engineer at Meta, and I work on the MetaWorks Meta for Work products like workrooms and workplace. I'm here at Infoshare to share some of the background about workrooms and how we're using technologies that would be more typically associated with web technologies for VR development, things like React VR. So Infoshare DEV for me represents a really good deep dive into technology from an engineering standpoint, and from what I've seen of the talks and the people that have come, it's very much focused on people developing their skills, learning more about different technologies, and experiencing sort of what's coming next for platforms like AI and Java, etc. Sure, so the talks that I've seen have come from people who are working on the very edge of technology. So I've seen Ron Veen talking about some of the features in Java that are coming in or have just recently landed in 21. And then we'll talk about Micronaut as well, where there was a lot of focus on how it differs from things like Spring, and people can use the more kind of ahead of time compilation to make your programs and software more efficient and performant and native ready. From the front end track, I've seen a lot of information about web performance, which is obviously very critical. People constantly need to make sure that their software is fast. And that aligns nicely with some of the things that I'm talking about too, because VR performance is nuanced and very different to web performance, but we have a lot of the same principles that people can take away and use in their day-to-day work. Infoshare definitely seems more focused because of 4 tracks rather than going really broad. And I know it's been described as smaller, but it doesn't seem that small to me. There's quite a lot of people here, it's in quite big venues. I think what I've seen is there's a good, especially from the Katowice part of the conference, there was a lot of people who are just becoming professionals. So there's a lot of students coming in and learning things and finding out how they can go into the industry. And the amount of code that people can see on screens and the amount of knowledge that they're getting that's directly from people working on projects, rather than it being kind of sales pitchy or more to do with evangelism around a particular technology. It's great. People get a lot of real world usage tips that they can take back to their day-to-day jobs. So Workrooms differs from Horizon Worlds in that it's not necessarily targeted as a consumer product. So there isn't perhaps the same mass market appeal, and it's earlier in its product life cycle. So we're focused on making sure that it fits the needs of people who are wanting to have social presence meetings, but with people that aren't obviously with you. And while we use it quite heavily internally, it's perhaps not the most broadly used by consumers just yet. But we do have a few dedicated companies that are really kind of using it in some unexpected ways, but also they're using it as we hope they would. You definitely get a piece of that you get a feel that people are looking to see if it will fit their needs, because one of the things that Workrooms offers is it's freeing you from space, if that makes sense. So you don't have to have physical space for everybody to be present in a meeting. So you are removing that overhead for a company. You don't have to have big physical presence everywhere. You can have these meetings and feel like you're with your colleagues, but without actually having to buy the real estate to actually put people in, which is great. So there's a definite benefit to people in different businesses that are trying that out. Interestingly, I've spoken to people. I spoke to somebody on Tuesday who has been using Workrooms individually because one of the things that you can use it with is you can have a remote desktop connection, and so you can see your computer in VR, so you can have a screen in front of you and you can be working in a personal office, and it can expand your own area to make you more productive on your own. So it's not, I wouldn't have thought, I don't personally think that's the use case I would use it for the most, but it is an interesting use case nonetheless, that people are getting value out of it even when they're not collaborating with other people. It's hard to predict the direction that this will go in, because I think if you look at what we offer, it's an immersive experience. But then when you see how new devices are coming out that have got more augmented reality and kind of real-world overlay use cases, then it might lead the product in a different direction. So like Apple Vision Pro launching next year, it's very much about spatial anchors within your own roomscape rather than it being an immersive, fully VR experience. So yeah, I don't know what people will want from it in the long term. I think there's always going to be a need for people to try and find a way to collaborate effectively without having to have everybody present in the same space, but that's not always going to be their first choice. So it could be a useful second choice to them. Training, it's great if you've got people coming from lots of different companies, but you need to have the hardware, so there is a limiting factor there. And I think just generally, it's an interesting way to explore things in a kind of low risk way, and reducing air miles as well is always a benefit, I think. Yeah, we use workrooms all the time. If you follow our CTO Boz on Instagram, you'll see he talks about his usage of workrooms in his reels quite a lot, and how he's getting into the headset and he's collaborating with people there. So yeah, workrooms. I think the thing with workrooms as well, you've got to remember there's a 2D part to it too. So you can have video conferencing and you can have VR conferencing. So that means it lends itself well to the meta use case, because we have people all over the world that need to collaborate, and we obviously have quite a heavy usage of VR headsets amongst people, especially in reality labs. When I first joined Workrooms and I got my headset, so I got a Quest Pro, I was quite struck by how realistic it was, despite being in an environment where you are embodied by a cartoony avatar. So even with that, it felt very much like I'm here in a room where I know I'm on my own, but actually there's 5 or 6 colleagues here with me. And things like the spatial audio, the Quest Pro's inward-facing camera, so they can track your features and your gestures and things with your face, and all the things like the body tracking as well. You can really tell that you're engaging with somebody in real time, rather than if you're having a meeting over something like Zoom or a video conferencing tool. It's harder to gauge kind of where people's attention is, or whether they're really interacting with you directly. And I found it really overwhelming. I was sat there and I was sort of sitting, is this real? Am I part of this? Am I watching a video? Am I in a game? But it's honestly, it's very rewarding. I find people are much more engaged, much more attention. We get quite a lot more kind of bandwidth from the meeting as well. I don't think it's any more tiring. It's not. I don't think it's any more tiring anyway than being in a physical room, because you're paying the same level of attention. I think the other thing as well, the use case is quite a lot more genteel than other ways that people use VR. So you're stationary, you're at a desk, you're participating in an office kind of environment. So there's no the amount of movement that your body is kind of perceiving is far lower. So it's not quite as intense on the senses in that sense. So I think you can kind of see from the outside what the challenges are. You have headsets that you wear. They need to be lightweight, they need to be comfortable, but they also need to be very performant, because you've got lots going on, rendering 3D scenes, perceiving gestures, hand tracking, all that kind of stuff. So we're very performance sensitive. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that any new feature we add, we have to make sure that it adds enough value to not detract from the performance budget that we have. And to give a comparison, typically on web we're looking at trying to hit 60 frames per second, but if you don't hit 60 frames per second, it's not too bad. As a customer experience, it feels slow, but it's not the worst thing. With VR, we're aiming to hit 72 frames per second. So you've got less than 14 milliseconds per frame to get everything, all the work done and all the rendering and compositing and everything. And anything that exceeds that can lead to a really jarring experience. And as people have publicised, VR can bring things like motion sickness, you can feel unwell, it can make you feel quite uncomfortable. So that is being mindful of that, and the physical symptoms that people can have based on poorer performance of the application is something that I think is always going to be a challenge for us. How would I advise people looking to move into a role like mine at Meta or wanting to gain a role at Meta, I think the attributes that people look for when they're interviewing are people who take ownership for their work, they're driven, they're looking to have impact on the product, but in a positive way for customers. Obviously there's a high quality bar for technical skills, so there's a need for really strong coding. And as you get more senior, you move into things like system design and product architecture as well. But if you look through kind of the things that we are asking in our interviews, it's largely behavioural and understanding whether you're going to have the same sort of mindset and fit for the culture, and you're going to be someone who will thrive in the environment that Meta provides. Languages, it can be anything from C++ through to C#, JavaScript. We have Hack, the internal version of PHP that forked some years ago that is now pretty much Meta-specific, but is still very widely used. Yeah, there's also Python. We're very broad with our language use.